Do you want your business to grow faster? Are you open to new and out-of-the-box ways to drive revenues and increase value? How do you imagine the most successful entrepreneurs and business leaders double, triple, or expand their businesses tenfold or more? This is a weekly podcast featuring conversations with business owners, executives, and leaders as we reveal behind-the-scenes details that give you, our listeners, the confidence to pursue your own deal-driven growth. On the show, we discuss a huge variety of deals, everything from large, complex mergers and acquisitions, capital raising, joint ventures, strategic alliances, real estate, affiliate and sponsorship deals, and more, including smaller deals that you can do without significant capital. My name is Courtenay, and I've been supporting deal-driven growth for businesses for over 35 years as a successful entrepreneur, professional negotiator, and attorney. My goal is to help you strategize, plan for, find, and complete deals that will help your company grow faster. Welcome to the Deal Quest podcast. Let's get started. Courtenay Shipley is the founder and chief planologist of Retirement Planology, a consulting and registered investment advisory firm for corporate-sponsored retirement plans. With a wealth of experience in the retirement plan industry, Courtenay not only offers her clients expertise in investment analysis, plan design, and employee education, but also helps them leverage their employee benefits in a way that supports their own business goals. And we'll talk about that because one of those goals could be M&A. She also worked with qualified retirement plans, developing strategies for third-party administrators, and conducted over 10,000 educational meetings. Courtenay holds various designations, including accredited investment fiduciary, chartered retirement plan specialist, certified plan fiduciary advisor, and certified exit planning advisor. She is also the esteemed president of the Retirement Advisors Council, and her outstanding contributions have earned her accolades such as Top Woman Advisor, Napa Young Gun, and FT Top 401 Advisor. Courtenay, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
So listen, I'm excited to have you on. And as regular listeners of the show know, I love the fact that we cover all aspects of all types of deals. And it's not only capital raising and M&A, although we do a lot of that, but it's other types of deals. And even within the categories of what people think about deals, we cover aspects of them that not everybody else covers. And that this is certainly going to be one of those in terms of the impact of retirement plans. So I'm excited about that. But before we get into all of that, I want to take you back to when you were a little kid growing up, maybe 10, 12 years old. What did you want to be? Because I'm guessing a certified retirement plan specialist, an entrepreneur in that area probably wasn't it at that time, but you tell me.
Ooh, 10 or 12. No, that was definitely not on my radar. I think that if anything, I probably wanted to be like a musical theater performer.
Okay.
Yeah, back then for sure. Mm-hmm.
I love it. Did you do any theater through school or in college?
Yeah. I did a fair amount of that. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
I did end up with a degree in music performance. So, okay. Adjacent to that. So, yeah.
So it's interesting because there are a lot of lawyers who fewer that do what I do, but a surprising number of litigators, or maybe not surprising, wanted to be actors or whether it was theater or movies or whatever. And I think it's maybe why they go into litigation and they present before juries. Like it's very interesting, very interesting. All right. One other question looking back, what was the first deal of any type that you can remember doing? Could be something young when you were young or something early in your career. Anything that's a deal that you remember that comes to mind?
A deal? Oh, my goodness.
Anything comes to mind.
The first deal that I observed in my professional career was a chain of hospitals that were buying up other hospitals. And that was fascinating because,
Sure.
You can imagine how many moving parts go into those deals, let alone the retirement plans. Other deals, though, let me think about that.
That's an interesting example. There are healthcare lawyers that really focus on that, but I've been involved in some deals where we've had clients in the healthcare space and we bring in a healthcare expert. Because, you want to talk about moving pieces. Not only do you have all the, but you have all the regulatory stuff that goes on and that kind of stuff as well. Yeah, no question. So obviously we covered a bit in your bio, but even before we get into the specific deal aspect of it, whatever, just, tell us a little more on exactly what you do and who your ideal clients are, in terms of what you do in your core business.
Yeah, we're definitely super nerds. We're looking over corporate retirement plans. Like, how exciting could that be, right? But it actually is pretty interesting. So any company that's sponsoring like a 401k or 403b, 457, if it's got some sort of tax code like that, that's probably something we oversee. Yeah, we work in the area of fiduciary responsibility. So, these plans are complicated. There's a lot of oversight. So we're there to be all hands on to help the plan sponsor figure out what they're supposed to be doing and like what the best practices are and what works for their organization. But more importantly, what this plan is supposed to do for their organization. Because as you know, the employees use it. They want to retire someday. They want to have the luxury of deciding how they spend their time later in life. And the employer looks at it as a benefit. So there's probably some sort of constraint around the budget, as well as how do we make sure that it serves our employees in a way that's good for recruiting as well as retention. So I would say everything that we do falls under those umbrellas, be it that it's the investment choices or it's how do we educate employees and help them understand the plan, to just being support for the plan sponsor.
Yeah, I love that. And, it's interesting. I mean, we get into that conversation of employee tax attraction and retention, right?
Yeah.
And incentivizing is really, it's always super important. But, anytime that the labor market's a little tight or whatever, it even becomes more important, right?
Absolutely.
But, you're competing for talent. And, one of the things that we've talked about a number of times on this podcast is how deals can help solve business challenges. And one of those business challenges, certainly, and that we hear a lot from clients these days, and my context is the ability to attract and retain, key.
Yeah.
So, sometimes we talk about things like phantom equity plans and other things, profit sharing plans and things that we do to help folks that might be non-qualified plans or obviously they could qualify. But certainly the stuff that you do, it comes into that category, right? How do you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And finding out like who are the most important people in your business and how are you keeping them around? And whether that's through the qualified plan or like what you just mentioned, the non-qualified, like a deferred compensation plan or something that gives them an ownership feel without having ownership, or a profit sharing plan, something like that, are so important in keeping those people because they're the ones that are the lifeblood of the business, besides the ownership. So yeah, anything to keep them around and keep them incentivized is super important.
And not only on an operating level, but obviously, listen, if you're doing a deal, if you're looking to sell your company eventually or even raise capital, your investors and or your buyers are going to be really they look at management team, right? They look at
absolutely
who the executive team is, especially, and how dependent the business is upon you as an owner. So important stuff.
Yeah, there was one situation where it was really interesting. The ownership was definitely very important, but it was like these mid-level managers that were like 2 levels down that were absolutely the most important ones. There was only 4 of them in the business. Yeah. They were extremely hard to replace. And, that's where you start to really get into trouble, right? Is there's a small amount and they're super important and hiring is awful. And the job that they have is it's what keeps the company going. And so that was like the perfect place for that non-qualified plan. I always had a bonus that they were giving up if they left with a longer vesting period that was rolling. So yeah.
Good stuff. All right. So listen, I think people can gather already just on a general level what the impact of obviously retaining and attracting key talent can have on enterprise value of a company and deals. But you also get involved much more specifically, right, related to retirement plans when deals are happening, when companies are buying other companies or selling. So talk to us a little bit about that aspect of your business and where your services come in, because I think that a lot of folks, they understand retirement plans, they understand the concept of having them be good incentives for employees, and maybe they have them in the company. But I don't know that people really talk that often about what happens when you have a deal going on in terms of the retirement plan side.
No, we are so far down on the to-do list, unfortunately, in the deal. They're like, retirement, who? What plan? Yeah. Oh, that's benefits. But yeah, it's so important. That's one of the biggest things that people can mess up, is just not realizing the impact that this plan can have, especially on what happens going on in the future. So when you think of it in terms of like asset sale versus stock sale, and the asset sale, you got the house, but all you're buying is the furniture out of it, right? So that's not that big a deal because generally the retirement plan stays behind with the house, right? And with the seller. So there's not a lot to be thinking about necessarily, other than like when the employees come over to the buyer's company, will they be eligible for benefits right away? Where are they going to be on the vesting schedule? Are you recognizing prior service and things like that?
Yeah.
But on the other side, when it's a stock sale situation, I mean, you've got decisions you have to make because you're buying the house and the furniture. And that means you are buying anything that is hidden behind those walls too, right? And the retirement plan oftentimes does not get the attention that it deserves. And unfortunately, that's just bad risk management all the way around. Do you know for sure that they've been using the right definition of compensation for matching people? Do you know for sure that they haven't screwed up, the accounting with the plan? And there's all kinds of stupid stuff that can really just waylay you in the future and be costly to fix. Did they accidentally not enroll a group of employees because the payroll system freaked out? So just taking with some time, and I know that is not something that usually people want to do when they're in the middle of the deal. They just want to get it done, but at least outsourcing it to somebody like us or an ERISA attorney who can take a look and just ask the questions about, what's been happening in this plan? Where are your meeting notes? What kind of advisor were you using? Was it someone who was a specialist in retirement plans versus just a regular, financial advisor broker off the street? Because that's where you make sure you keep yourself covered if you are going to take over the plan. Now, your other option is to terminate right away before the actual date of the sale. And if that's the case, no big deal, right? You're terminating the plan, but it has to be done before you actually do the sale, because then you lose the ability to terminate it if the buying company already sponsors a plan. And then you've got, 1 year to figure out how to get everything in motion and lined up and the proper design features figured out, because you got to aggregate those plans in the future.
Got it. So, yes. All right. So you raised a few things. I want to drill down on some of them, maybe in reverse order. So let me just say this for the listeners as well. Obviously, most people know, if they're in the M&A space, that most deals are done as asset deals, but there are a lot of reasons why a deal is done as a stock deal. I mean, we have one going on now with a selling company who happens to be our client on the sell side, is a C Corp. And there's reasons why they formed as a C Corp. It's rare that you form any kind of growth company as a C Corp these days, but if they've been around for a while, or maybe they came about due to some sort of merger acquisition where there were net operating loss carry forward reasons that, I'm not going to get into all the deals, but there were reasons why companies are C Corps. That's a situation in which, you will often see a stock sale. There's other situations, especially maybe with international players and, things like that sometimes come into play. So there are, although it's a minority of the deals, there are definitely deals that are being done as stock deals or equity deals if it's an LLC, membership interest sales, whatever you want to call it. And you also certainly have that with minority investors, right? Yep. If somebody's investing in a minority stake, and those minority investors are going to want to do their due diligence as well, even though you don't have the planned merger issues on a sale, right? You still have, if a minority investor is smart, they're going to want to know, that's part of due diligence, what are the liabilities. So you rattled off some things, that could go wrong. How often do we see those issues? How do people prevent them? I know, I'll be frank, it's the reason why we work with somebody on our plans, right? Because I'm an attorney, but I'm not an ERISA attorney. I don't understand this stuff, I'll be frank, right? So we pay a professional and we have our meetings every on a regular basis as required. And they go over it with us and we have minutes and all that kind of stuff. How often do you see these issues and why do they come up?
Well, they come up pretty much because what I said before is it's the last thing on the list, right? Yeah. Or if it maybe didn't even get on the list. So they're more focused on how do we structure the deal? What's it going to look like going forward? How's the money getting transferred? All those things. And so, or the synergies between companies and, the purpose behind the whole deal in the first place. Yeah. How often is it? I would say it's more often than not. We've had probably a record number of merger and acquisition in our client base, I would say, in the last 2-3 years, which, makes sense. COVID certainly did ignite some things there. The issue that I've seen most commonly is that they've brought some companies together with common ownership where there's an 80% or more common ownership across them. And they've completely ignored the fact that they're a controlled group for ERISA purposes, which means that all the plans have to be tested together. And there's certain thresholds that they have to meet as far as criteria on the different plan design. And so we have one client right now where I said, wait, hold on, back up. What did you say? You just purchased what? Who? And so they're like, well, that's so funny. We pay the attorneys a lot of money and they never pointed that out. And so I'm really upset because they should have told us that. And I thought, well, if they don't have an ERISA attorney on the team or it's just not on somebody's radar, then it does slip through the cracks. And in this case, they've got 2 401k plans and a simple IRA. Now, they're going to have to put those plans together someday. But for right now, they're in the 1-year waiting period. So they do have some time before they have to get everything straight. And that's at least nice that you have that grace period. I would say the other situation we've seen is where they did everything right. They just didn't consider what was going to happen. And so what I mean by that is it was totally an asset sale. So easy breezy, right? They're going to leave that plan behind. But what happened was they didn't tell the advisor or the record keeper until like the 11th hour. And they're like, okay, we just signed these papers. Well, really it was after the 11th hour, I should say, but we signed these papers, we've sold, we need to terminate the plan. It's like, okay, well, that doesn't happen overnight. That's going to take about 90 days at least to get everything set up, get the proper compliance stuff done, and then get everybody brought up to full vesting because now you have, you're letting everybody go. There's no more vesting schedule in that situation. And so just the amount of time that it took was very surprising because they hadn't said anything about it prior. And of course, there's non-disclosure agreements and things like that that may prevent that from happening. But on the flip side, the more heads up you can give your vendors that something may happen, the better off you'll be as far as timing. But what happened in that situation is that the buy-in company brought on the employees. They started them over. They didn't recognize any of their prior service. And in this case, they had some, 10, 20, 30-year employees, subjected them all to the waiting period of a year before they could get in the plan and get the match. And they would have a 6-year vesting schedule. And so as you can imagine, no one's going to leave over the retirement plan itself. But that definitely sent a message in my book when I read that. And I was like, whoa, hold on here. But phone call after phone call, I'm leaving. I'm not going to roll my money to the new company. I'm actually going to this company over here. And I think they lost about 20 to 30% of the workforce within the first 6 months of that acquisition, just because it was clear they didn't really want those employees around, or at least that was the message that they sent.
Right. So I hear you saying that, well, the retirement plan itself, if that's the only thing, it's not. But it's indicative, right? And certainly one of the things we have talked about, this podcast is that integration, that cultural integration with employees and how you retain them or whatever. And odds are, if they're not recognized as people's prior service and they're putting people on experienced employees when they acquire a company on a wait list, there's probably other things they're doing culturally along those lines that create attrition. So,
it was definitely only one in a number of things. And that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah. It's amazing how badly companies do on that sometimes. It's like, and especially because in some of these businesses, the talent is really, crucial.
Yeah,
so,
it's really precious.
Let's take a break from the show for a minute so I can tell you about an incredible resource my team and I have put together for you. Secrets of Deal-Driven Growth, Creative Ways to Grow Your Business, Even in Challenging Times, is a powerful ebook that helps you take DealQuest podcast episodes and apply them to your own life and business. This is the ideal tool for anyone looking for creative ways to grow as deal makers, and you can get yours now. It's as easy as heading to CoreyCupfer.com/workbook and downloading your copy. While you're there, you can also consider joining our dynamic deal-driven community of founders, experts, small business owners, and entrepreneurs. Now back to the show. All right, so in terms of the company on the sell side, so one of the things that we do with clients from a legal point of view on other things, and again, we're not ERISA attorneys, but, whether it's their contracts, whether it's, we know the due diligence that a buyer is going to do. Mm-hmm. So we try to do a pre-due diligence process with the clients so that the issue's not discovered by the buyer, right?
Set them up for success.
The buyer's accountant, so the buyer's whatever, right? We try to get ahead of it.
Yeah.
So, in terms of if somebody's a seller and they have a deal coming, what are those things that they should be looking at to say, hey, what might we need to clean up in advance of a deal so that we don't have these problems? And less so, not only after the fact, but even in discovery and due diligence of issues. And similar to what you said on the other point, I doubt if the only thing that seems sloppy or whatever is the retirement plan, and they could, especially if they can leave it behind or clean it up, maybe that's not alone. But I always preach that the thing is, you want to be buttoned up in due diligence because the people who are doing the due diligence normally, not the CEO or the head of M&A or whatever who greenlit the deal, the people they send in, the accountants, the lawyers, the HR people, the whatever, they're always looking for a reason why they should do the deal because they don't want to miss anything. because their job's online, right? So you don't want to. So everything that isn't clean in due diligence creates a risk of the deal not going through. So what would be some of the things that they should look for to get like their house in order before they even, get into a deal if they want to really do it right?
Yeah. The requirement for retirement plans is basically that you don't want to have a file folder full of problems and then nothing that says, but generally speaking, we run this plan well, right? You want to document the ordinary.
Yeah.
And it shows, 99% of the time the plan runs well. It's just this 1%. Then we discovered it and we fixed it. And here's how we did it, right? That's the type of stuff that a good person doing due diligence on the retirement plan would be looking for, is credible evidence that you keep an eye on the plan. You've got regular meetings. You take meeting notes during that time or meeting minutes that talk about what you discussed and how you made the decisions that you made. So red flags would be, that you haven't looked at the investments in years. Those are the ones that came with the plan. That's not how that works. Or, you don't have a third-party advisor. A lot of times that's not a good recipe for success. Or let's see, what else? Employees, you don't have a record of like what the employees received. So there's these notices that are required to go out every year. Normally the record keeper holds on to them, but it's just a good idea to download them and have them in your own file, right? To say, these are the ones that went out for this year. So having all of that readily available at your fingertips is super important. And if you haven't done it in the past, start today, You probably got a year or so before things actually close. And so it's a good time to establish those good habits of showing that you've monitored the costs of the plan, that you've taken a look at the investments, that employees have been informed about the plan. They understand it. They appreciate it. You look like you've done some numbers tying back to each other at the end of the year as far as compliance is concerned, and making sure that your definition of compensation that you use for the plan is 100% buttoned down, tied up. Everything's good to go. T's crossed, I's dotted, the whole 9 yards. Because that is the number one thing that would get you in trouble, is if you have really screwed up your match because you forgot that you excluded bonuses or you included bonuses or something like that. And now there's a discrepancy in numbers.
And this is a more general question, but I'm just curious, more sort of less specific to the deal side, but more just what we're seeing out there, especially with people looking for talent. Is there a general sense on what people are doing in terms of the, waiting periods, right? For the eligibility periods or with regard to vesting or, anything like that? Are there trends in that or differences that you're seeing or anything that's...
I would say things are shorter these days than they have been. 1 year is the statutory limit for how long you can make somebody wait. And we're not seeing 1 year being exercised as often anymore. Having said that, though, every industry is different. And so you may have a general sense of what the turnover is that you want to align with when they become eligible for the plan. You may want to use that as a retention strategy as well. Like, oh, look, in a month you get this, in 3 months you get that sort of thing. But overall, like the vesting schedules used to be something that would really keep people around. But people do not stay for vesting schedules anymore. So the longer 5 and 6 years I've seen go away, it's now down more to like 3 years in most cases. If you do have a vesting schedule, you're not a safe harbor plan that gives everybody vested, automatically. But those are the main things that I'm seeing. And of course, a vesting schedule is not a bad thing. You never hire a person thinking they're going to work there less than 5 years, right? But again, it doesn't really do much for you.
Yeah. And you also talked about the fact that if it is a stock deal or equity deal and you don't terminate the plans in advance, that there is this integration, that has to happen without getting too technical on it. Like what's involved in that? Is it the kind of thing where the seller's plans have to roll into the buyer's plan somehow? Or is it that it creates something new and there are differences in terms amongst those plans? Like how does that integration work if you haven't terminated the prior plans?
Yeah, yes to all of that. Basically, if you're going to be taking over the old plan, the seller's plan, then there's a lot of different things you need to be considering. So as far as provisions, there are certain protected provisions, usually having to do with like eligibility and retirement age and things like that. So if you do maintain their plan and you want to merge it into your plan now. And so you don't have multiple plans to be keeping up with. You're going to have to look at the provisions and see how similar they are and see which ones are protected and which ones aren't, how you can amend things to where it makes sense to merge those plans. Or maybe you keep operating them separately, and that's when you have to consider the compliance testing and will it pass what the IRS says is okay and what DOL says is okay. So there's just a lot of comparing and contrasting, making sure that rules are followed. It's not a bad thing, but it does take a minute for sure. And at the end of the year, all of that stuff has to be aggregated together. And so when you get in a situation like we had one client where they were purchased by a larger entity that bought, I don't know, like 5 or 6 different companies in that year at the same time. Yeah. And I said, okay, well, what are we doing with this retirement plan? Who do we need to send the compliance information to? And they're like, what are you talking about? And so, I mean, I know that plan was not being operated correctly because they needed to aggregate all those numbers. They were out of their 1-year period. So they needed to be tested together. And I'm sure it would not have gone very well because the plans that we were hearing about were substantially different. So it's just important to, again, stay on top of these types of things and not just trust maybe that the buying entity knows everything that they should know about it.
And if this is not done right, who has the risk? Is this the thing where both the seller and the buyer can have risks depending upon what happens, or is it one side or the other?
I mean, at that point, it's pretty much the buyer.
Yeah.
Who's going to have all the risk, right? And especially in a stock sale, you're buying the house and the furniture and whatever's hidden behind the walls.
Yep.
So in an asset sale, it's less common for the buyer to take over the plan or to keep the plan going, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's sometimes I prompt questions that I know the answer to because I want to make sure the audience has it. So, yeah, obviously that's the case, right? One of the things, although, I mean, so as a buyer, if you're buying equity, you by law default to taking all of the liabilities of the company. Now you can and will have indemnity provisions in the agreement for anything that happened prior to sale, but that doesn't mean you're not liable for it. It just means that you can go back to the seller if it's something, that's covered by indemnity and it's a prior issue. But then depending upon how you deal with structure, whether you have back-end money to secure it or not, whatever, you might have to chase them for the money. You might have something to secure it against. So it brings up all the indemnity issues as well. But as to any governmental agency, right, or as to any participant, if there was an issue or whatever, you're taking on that liability if you're doing an equity.
You got it.
Equity deal. Yeah. Good stuff. Okay. What else? I mean, so this is an area, a lot of my guests who I have on this podcast are talking about stuff that I am, that I do every single day and I know really well. And I know all the questions to ask. I am not an ERISA attorney. I'm not a retirement plan attorney. I know enough when I do these deals to identify it as an issue to the client to make sure they're speaking to, their retirement plan administrators and record keepers and specific counsel. But what else should I be asking you? What else should the audience know about, anything that is triggered by deals in terms of these plans? If anything.
I would say one of them kind of comes back to the compensation and benefits package.
Yeah.
So there was a law firm deal. This is going back a long time. I can't remember all the particulars, but basically what it came down to is they had a really generous health insurance plan and a really generous retirement plan. And the buying firm did not have nearly as generous plans. And so it was actually perceived as a huge compensation cut because they had to come out of pocket so much more for their health insurance and some other benefits. And they were getting less of a match on their retirement side or less of a contribution from the employer. And it really started things with a pretty bad taste in folks' mouths. So think about that. And if you are the seller and you realize that this is going to happen, that this is something that's going to happen because the buyer's not, they don't have as good of benefits or something along those lines, maybe try and negotiate some sort of pay raise in to cover, the difference between what would be coming out of the employee's pocket or something along those lines. But I would say that don't ignore the benefits for sure, because that's part of the compensation package overall. And so if they're feeling like they're just about to get a 15% pay cut, the employees will not stick around for that. That's not going to be helpful for anybody. So that's one thing to be thinking about. Going back to what we were talking about before with how do you get your house in order prior, making sure that you know what the cost of your retirement plan is There's a lot of times that has not been benchmarked in a few years, or knowing how your plan stacks up against your competitors. That could be useful information to say, look, we got a pretty good plan and here's how we know. And this is why our benefits package, including our retirement plan, looks really good against the people that we're recruiting talent from in the area or something along those lines. That's going to be good information for your buyer as well. And then I would say the other thing is just making sure the house is in order. So do you have all your plan documents at your fingertips? If somebody were to ask any questions about how did you make this decision 2 years ago to remove this investment from your plan, you would have an answer for that and one that makes sense. So any sort of documentation that you can just kind of dust off and get in order, it just makes life so much easier.
Yeah, and I like one of the first things you said about sort of anticipate, because, let's say if the buyer's plan isn't as generous as the sellers. And listen, if you're a bigger company, and it's not always the case, but it's, most deals, usually the buyer is bigger than the seller. And so they're not going to go change their entire plan in most cases. Right?
No, yeah.
Upgrade it to what they're, so they're not going to let the tail wag the dog. But I like the way you said it. They got to understand that that's effectively a pay cut. So maybe they can make it up some other way and have that communication, right? Because it's also one of the things I found, and I don't know if you've seen this, and again, I know you sort of see this sort of sleeve of it, but I've seen in other situations where like the messaging out to the employees is super important.
So important.
It's easy for them. There's a certain number of the employees just have the kind of mentality where they're going to be comparing each slice to the same slice on the other side. So the retirement plan is not as generous. Okay, that's a negative. They might be getting a bonus to come over. They might be getting equity in the, an equity class or some sort of phantom or a profits interest or something like that in the buyer, which they didn't have before. But they get focused on this thing that's lesser than, right? And if you don't communicate it well with the entire package to show that overall they're going to be doing at least as good and hopefully better, it becomes a problem. So I don't know, I see you shaking your head. So it sounds like you've seen that as well.
Yeah, definitely. I would say total compensation statements are the most underrated, but so stinking important things that a company can do to say, look how much we do pay for your health insurance that you don't see. It's all invisible until you put it out there, right? And so, even just as a healthy company that you're thinking about selling in the future, you want employees who appreciate the benefits that you offer. You want them to use it. You want them to be relevant, all that stuff. And then as the transition happens, you will absolutely have those employees, and you already know them, who are going to go line by line and say, well, this isn't better. Well, this is better. Well, this isn't better. And if you think about employees as a whole in a transition, they're scared. They don't know. They have the devil that they know, and now they're going to the devil they don't know. And so they're looking for indications that everything's going to be okay or everything's not going to be okay. And unfortunately, most people view it through the lens of, this is change and change is bad. And so the messaging, the communication, the thinking about what's going through their minds, getting it out in the open in the town hall. Yeah, you're right. You know what? The match isn't as good. And I'm sorry about that. But I want you to know that we've considered X, Y, Z or whatever, but having that transparency with them because they know, they're going to know. It's really important, really important.
And if one of them's not going to know, they're going to speak to somebody who knows, and then they're going to know because, especially when it's a deal going on, everybody talks. So yeah.
Something on the buyer side. So I think that this is also a forgotten thing about retirement plans is that if you have a situation where it's like a cash balance pension plan that's going to need to have a contribution made every year, how much is that? What's it look like going in? What are you buying? What kind of liabilities are you buying on a pension plan? Also for 401k, or, there's been an ongoing profit sharing contribution made every year to 401k that the employees are going to expect, or a mandatory contribution because you have a safe harbor plan. So you have to put in 3% or you have to match up to 4%, something like that. Knowing where that falls in the balance sheet. It's on there, but just keeping that in the back of your mind, because that can be a large liability if you think we're about to pump all this money into this company to hire a bunch more staff. So make sure that's not something that becomes a larger expense than you meant it to be, especially with how the plan is structured.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. So I want to throw out a question just because I think it may be on some people's minds. And, this is something you used to hear more about in the news with big companies about this, and I know it's because the industry's evolved in terms of the type of plans that most companies have versus what they used to have, right? So,
Sure.
but you used to hear a lot more in the news about these underfunded like pension plans, right? Whatever.
Yep.
And obviously, if you're a buyer, that could be a liability. You want to just give a little insight as to if you're aware as to where those came up and why. I believe it's the case that's less of an issue as the way plans have evolved these days. But you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So the defined benefit plan has kind of gone the way of the dodo. And the reason is because the company had to fund it. And it's based on your pool of employees, the actuarial numbers that come back, and interest rates. So it's a giant math equation with very smart people calculating it that are paid more than and know more than I do. However, what ends up happening is you get this surprise bill, right? And companies don't like surprise bills at the end of the year, especially when interest rates change or there's new mandates or something like that. So the defined benefit plan, because it was defining the benefit in the future to be paid with a pool of money that they're investing today, it was a lot of liability, quite frankly. And so companies just didn't want to tolerate that and would rather have a defined contribution, meaning that they are defining on the front end what they will put in, and then it's up to whatever happens with the investments for how much that person gets in the future, rather than defining the outcome. And so there's been a large shift over time away from the defined benefit plans. Most of them have been frozen. Many of them have been terminated towards something that's contributory, where the employee is also putting some money in, i.e. the 401k plan. So you are special if you still have a defined benefit plan. As far as employees are concerned, they're like, wow, they're really taking care of me. But, how attractive that looks to a buyer, I'm not sure these days. But
it's rare, right? Now, like you said.
But there are some pretty decent tax benefits to having a defined benefit plan too. So it is definitely not something to be thrown out for sure. But certain industries and certain size companies, I think, still have them. But I would say in the smaller mid-market, it's pretty unusual to see the defined benefit plan. Now, I say that, and then there's professional practices like law firms, dental firms, what else? Medical practices, where it made a lot of sense for the owners to set up those plans to tax shelter more for their own money. And anytime you go into a deal and it's a solely owned business, the owner's taxes and the owner's desire for what their retirement should look like in the future always plays into how the retirement plan has been structured in the past. Yeah. So it is something that buyers who are buying those types of firms need to be aware of and take into consideration as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So I just want to put that out there just because it's something that people have heard about. And yeah, that's obviously why. I've been doing this for 38 years. So there was a time when this was a much bigger, come up a lot because, that was something that was much more common. And it's not totally extinct, but certainly, yeah, and you're right. Like we've occasionally seen it with older, large companies, but even most of those have moved off of it. But yeah, so the plans we have now, that is in the odds are, if you're a buyer, and especially in these days in a small and medium size, that that's not gonna be a risk you're dealing with just because of the type of plans that even if you're taking them on exist in this day and age. But it used to be a much bigger problem. Great. Anything else you're seeing, whether it's related or not, just in terms of these plans or what's happening, or anything new on the on the horizon that people might look forward to? I know there's often talk about changes, and obviously sometimes they get political, and we don't have to get into the politics of it. But like I said, anything it's always interesting because listen, it comes up for me, right? We've investigated the different types of plans, and there are certain and a lot of times, I don't know if this is 100% true, but a lot of times you mentioned these professional services firms and the benefits, even of a defined benefit plan potentially. A lot of times there is some correlation between the ability of an owner or owners to put away more money and the amount they need to commit to their employees, right? And it's sort of a trade-off. And I guess it's one of the things that's sort of logical. The government has said, hey, if you want to get more of a benefit, you got to, we want to have a policy that create some opportunities for your employees. So, but in any case, anything that's interesting that you're saying or anticipating?
Yeah, two things come to mind. Back in the end of 2019, right before COVID, when was that? There was a secure 1.0 Act, that's an acronym for a long name of a bill. And then also Secure 2.0, which came out a year and a half, 2 years later. And so one of the goals that they had was to make some things easier and kind of restructure some existing IRS language and some ERISA language. But the other thing that it did, so there's 95 provisions that are related to retirement plans in there. But the other thing that it was trying to expand coverage. And so a lot of states nowadays are requiring companies to have a retirement plan for their employees when they, didn't necessarily have that mandate prior. And the Secure Act Duo also has made it to where if you have long-term part-time employees, so you've got these part-timers who've worked for you for years, let's say 2 years, and they've worked 500 hours in those 2 years, then you have to let them in the plan. You have to let them use the plan. They can just put their own money in. You don't have to match them or give them profit sharing or, the normal employer contribution, but you do have to at least give them the opportunity to contribute. And I think that's great because, how do people save for retirement? Through a work-sponsored plan. I mean, they're 13 times more likely to save if they have it there than if they have to go set up an IRA on their own. So that's an important thing that employers all over need to be tracking those hours and their part-time workforce. And, part-timers are fantastic the additions to your company. In many cases, they do a lot of work that couldn't otherwise be done, or they need the flexibility in their own lives or whatever the case may be. So I'm a big proponent of that, but it's important for employers to know that that's there. And then the other is that those mandates are in certain states already. I think it's 13 states that require you to a retirement plan of some sort, either the state IRA plan or start your own 401k or other type of IRA plan.
Great. Okay. Well, this has been great. I mean, listen, as you've indicated, it's way down the priority list from,
so far down.
but it's those kind of things. And
well, I think it goes back to establishing that you need a really good team around you when you go through these deals. Bottom line, you can't just wing it, right? You've got to bring in the right people like you to advise on these sorts of transactions, what the best way and what the most successful way to have the right outcomes is.
Yeah. And it's, as we sort of indicated, I mean, at a minimum, these things that you put low on the priority list can then become a scramble or a headache later. And beyond that, they could be even more so, meaning like the situation we talked about where it's just one of the indicators of things that you didn't focus on that, let's say, affects employee retention, right? And then the lack of employee retention can become a much more serious issue. So these are important. And frankly, it's why you look at, we do deals on the sell side, on the buy side. On the buy side, we have clients that are serial acquirers and do this all the time. And then we have some folks who are doing their first, first or second deal, right? And it's one of the reasons why the serial acquirers get so good at this stuff, right? Because they've got teams and they got checklists and they got experience and whatever. And, if you go with a serial buyer, trust me, they're going to have, it may not show up on the first few items or even maybe the first page of there, but on their due diligence list, they're going to have the checkpoints to take a look at the retirement plans, right? Because they've been doing them so many times, and maybe before they became serial acquirers, they got burned on it once or twice. Yeah. So yeah, good stuff. So it's been great having you on. So two final things. One, let people know where they can find out more about you and your company and your services.
Yep. You can follow me on LinkedIn at C. Shipley, or you can go to our website, which is retirementplanology.com/learn more, and you can book a call to have a quick chat about your retirement plan. There's also a bunch of other resources on that website as well to help guide you in the right direction.
Right. And all that's going to be in the show notes as well. I mean, if you take it down, so you can definitely check it out. So, Courtenay, my final question on the podcast is always about my highest value in life, which is freedom. And for me, that means everything from freedom from all people around the world, from oppression to why I've been an entrepreneur, for decades now and haven't had a boss. What does freedom mean to you, and how does it impact your life and business?
Oh my gosh. As somebody who's married to someone in the special forces, de oppresso liber, to liberate the oppressed, I would say it has a huge impact on our family. For me, freedom of choice, right? That's what that means. The ability to, down the line, have the luxury of deciding how I spend my time and being able to choose how I do things and spend my time today. That's what it's about for me.
I love it. And listen, it's not lost on me the fact that helping people with their retirement also, right, provides them with that choice and that freedom, down the line that they wouldn't otherwise have for those too many people who don't have, are not adequately covered in retirement. Courtenay, thanks for being such a great guest on the DealQuest podcast.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I enjoyed it.
Excellent. Thank you for joining me on this episode of DealQuest, where we help you understand how deal-driven growth can be your ticket to freedom. I want to invite you to a unique way to tap into the wisdom and experience of the DealQuest community. The Deal Den is a place where entrepreneurs, high-level executives, and business leaders come together, support each other's growth and success, and share what's working best, as well as what challenges we are facing right now. You will get input not only from me, but from all of our members. We collaborate and serve each other. To join us, go to CoreyKupfer.com/DealDen. I'll see you there. I'm Corey Kupfer. Until next week, wishing you the freedom and financial prosperity that I know your DealQuest will bring.